All right, today we're diving into a really big question. How do you even begin to map something as incredibly complex as mental illness? For a long, long time, our maps were all about symptoms, the stuff we could see on the surface. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the real answers are hidden way deeper, down in the actual wiring of our brains? And that's the core challenge, right? The human mind, it's not some simple territory with clear borders you can just draw. It's this dynamic, super intricate landscape. So what kind of map could possibly do it justice? To figure out where we're headed, we've got to first take a look at where we've been. Okay, so let's start with part one, the symptom puzzle. Our journey really begins with the old school map. For a very long time, this was our approach, and it was kind of like trying to figure out what's wrong with a super complex engine just by looking at the little warning lights blinking on the dashboard. And for decades, that map was the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This was the guidebook, the absolute Bible for clinicians. It organized mental illness into these neat categories based on checklists of symptoms. Now, this was super important, don't get me wrong. It gave everyone a common language to talk about these things, but it had a huge limitation. It was great at describing what was happening, but it couldn't tell you why. And this right here really gets to the heart of the problem. You see, the DSM approach is all symptom-based. It's focused on what you can see and what people tell you they're feeling. But it begged a really critical question. What if you have two people with the exact same checklist of symptoms, but their brains are doing completely different things? That's a huge problem, right? And that's exactly the question that pushed scientists to start searching for a totally new approach, one based not just on what you see, but on the biology underneath it all. So this search for a new way forward led to a massive effort to draw a completely different kind of map. The goal was to create what you might call a biological blueprint for the mind. Enter the new framework, RDoC, which stands for Research Domain Criteria, and the idea behind it was, honestly, revolutionary. Instead of starting with big labels like depression or anxiety, RDoC starts with the fundamental building blocks of how our brains function and how we behave. It's a complete flip of the script, a bottom-up approach that tries to build a picture of mental illness from its biological roots. And this wasn't just some casual idea floating around. This was a major, major strategic shift. Back in 2009, the National Institute of Mental Health officially launched the RDoC project. It was a direct answer to this growing feeling in the scientific community that the old symptom-based maps were actually holding back progress, preventing us from finding new and more effective treatments. And here's how that works in practice, to make it a little more concrete. Instead of having one giant bucket labeled depression, RDoC pushes scientists to look at the specific underlying systems that might be going haywire. Things like the brain circuits that handle fear and anxiety, or the cognitive systems that control our attention and memory. See, it breaks the problem down into its fundamental biological parts. So, why go through all this trouble? What's the ultimate goal? Well, the logic is actually pretty straightforward. If you can pinpoint the specific biological circuit that's not working right, you have a much better shot at developing a treatment that targets that circuit directly. The big hope here was that this new, super precise map would finally unlock a whole new generation of really effective therapies. All right, so for more than a decade, RDoC has been this guiding blueprint for mental health research. But, like any good map, you have to test it against the actual terrain of the real world. And just recently, a huge study did exactly that. And the results were, well, pretty surprising. And this quote really sums up the key takeaway from that new research. Basically, it suggests that the RDoC framework, well, it may not be able to fully capture the sheer complexity of how our brains and our behaviors are connected. It's a powerful statement, suggesting that even our most advanced biological blueprint might be missing something really, really essential. And just to be clear, this wasn't some minor critique from an obscure journal. This finding was published in Nature Communications, which is one of the top scientific journals in the world. So this represents a really serious, really compelling challenge to the whole RDoC framework. So what did the study actually find? Well, to put it simply, when the researchers looked at brain activity in real time, the patterns they saw just didn't line up neatly with the tidy categories proposed by RDoC. It's like the architect's blueprint didn't quite match the building itself. There was, as they put it, a poor fit. Okay, so where does that leave us? Now, it's super important to understand. This finding doesn't mean RDoC was a mistake, not at all. In fact, this is exactly how science is supposed to work. You test your best ideas, you find the flaws, and you evolve. It pushes us beyond the blueprint and forces us to ask a new question. If the brain isn't just a collection of separate, neat little circuits, then what is it? And this brings us right to the next frontier, thinking about the brain through what's called neural computation. The big idea here is to stop seeing the brain like a car engine, with a bunch of separate parts, each doing its one specific job. Instead, we need to think of it more like a bustling city, a dynamic, interconnected network where everything is constantly interacting with everything else. This idea of thinking in networks really captures a profound shift. The new focus isn't just on the individual neighborhoods in the brain. Instead, it's all about mapping the relationships, the connections, and the flow of information, the traffic that moves between all of them. So, if you look at it from this perspective, something like the feeling of anxiety or the process of remembering something, it isn't located in one specific spot in the brain. It actually emerges from this incredibly complex, coordinated dance of activity happening all across the entire brain. It's the pattern of the network, not just the individual pieces, that truly matters. And that brings us right back to our big question. Is the mind a list of symptoms, or is it a dynamic network? We started out by mapping symptoms. Then we tried to draw a biological blueprint of circuits. And now it seems like science is telling us that the truest map of all might be one of a constantly changing, deeply interconnected network. The journey to understand our own minds is far from over, and that map is still being drawn.